My guests this week are Mike Lisk and Andy Kindler. Mike Lisk has been an associate producer of The Best Show with Tom Scharpling for nearly 20 years and is also the co-host of the Patreon shows Make Mike Marvel and Rubenesque. He also co-hosts Egg Foo What, which is described as the first and only podcast about people eating stuff. Andy Kindler is a comedian who has appeared on The Late Show with David Letterman, Late Night with Conan O'Brien, and The Daily Show. As an actor, he's had recurring parts on Everybody Loves Raymond and Maron. And as a voice actor, you can hear him on Dr. Katz Professional Therapist, Home Movies, and as Mort in Bob's Burgers. He also performed the first live stand-up set given via hologram. And it gives me great pleasure to welcome to Revolutions Per Movie, Mike Lisk and Andy Kindler. Hello.
Hello to you.
Hello, Chris. Hi, Andy.
Hey, Mike. I'm so glad we're doing this because, and I know you're going to say something, but Mike and I have gotten into argument. I've so horrible. Got an argument once about Frank Zappa where I was like I would say, well, I'm a comedian. And Mike was like, oh, I guess you're a comedian, you know. And it's so the opportunity just to really have a discussion. Yeah, I felt so terrible about it. I hate argument, and it wasn't even like you. It wasn't even a big argument. I just felt terrible about it.
I'm not a Zappa defender, really.
No. You were arguing against me. You were saying that he wasn't that.
Oh, you like?
I think he's funny. Okay. I thought he was hilarious.
Okay.
And you were saying you don't think he's funny, and I got my feelings hurt, and I was like, I even went back to listen to Freak Out and stuff. No, you were right, and I was acting as people act.
Everybody's right. Everybody's entitled to their opinion.
Yeah, and today's film will be 200 Motels. We're changing it. We're going to do Zappa now for 2 hours.
I just want to make it clear that because I'm a comedian does not mean I have a better sense of humor than anybody else. I happen to, Mike and I share this kind of sense of humor, but it's not because I'm a comedian, because a lot of comedians are terrible.
Can you be a cynic and love the Grateful Dead, like, uncritically? Because the band does get a lot of pushback.
No, not for me, but I think the cynics and Tom Scharpling is who brought me and Andy together. I wouldn't know Andy if it wasn't for my participation on The Best Show. But Tom makes the case that they have a great business model, that they were out in front for the do-it-yourself movement. They tried to start their own record label. It did not succeed, but they've run their own business since the band. Well, it keeps being revived. It was dead, then it's back. You can't kill the Grateful Dead.
Yeah,
the business is still going. They're still generating. They're still putting out CDs. They've got Dead & Company, which I thought was done, but I guess they're going to play the Sphere.
But it just seems like they're such an easy target. And I'm talking to two very funny people who truthfully love the Dead.
But Tom Scharpling, who's hilarious, is also very cutting in his opinions. One time I was after the Best Show, there was a Billy Joel song on. I didn't know it was a Billy Joel song. And for 1 second, I was like, because you're living in the is that a song? Because you're living in the schmoopy
Could be
world.
any Billy Joel song.
Yeah, and then we can. So I was going. I made the horrible mistake of not knowing it was Billy Joel and saying I kind of like this song, and that was it.
Ooh.
That was the end of the evening because he is vicious. He calls the band civil war reenactors. So he does not like the music, and that's where he's wrong.
Yeah, he has very strong opinions, and this has been a running joke on The Best Show. It's almost, believe it or not, 20 years I've been involved with The Best Show.
Wow,
amazing.
And there's been lots of back and forth over the Grateful Dead. Hopefully, by the end of the show, we'll hear Andy's legendary imitation of Pigpen, which has become a regular soundbite on the show.
Well, it's so funny because, like, in the 80s, I lost all of my so-called punk rock friends to the Dead, right? Like they were moving away
80s?
from
not the 80s.
like 84.
Wow.
They were stopping the whole Dead Kennedy whole server thing, and they were running towards the Dead. They get into it in a documentary. It was such a microcosm of a scene. And I think as teenagers, they were excited about, the drug culture and the sexual culture and what was going on beyond the music.
Yeah.
But what was your entryway into finding out about the band? Was it a friend that turned you on to it? Was it something you read or heard on the radio or a record store clerk?
I'll tell you what it was for me. I went to, I'm not bragging. I went to the State University of New York at Binghamton. Look, not everybody could get in. You do what you can do. Harper College, SUNY Binghamton, 75 to 78. My friend Ira Kriegsman turned me on to the Grateful Dead, and we also did maybe I shouldn't say, the character of Ira Kriegsman and I did LSD together and all of these drugs. So I discovered the Dead when I discovered LSD. So to me, I always felt I think the oldest guy here. I think I'm 67 years old, and I was living the 70s, wanting to be a Deadhead, and actually going to see things in 76, 77, 78. And already that was, I don't want to say that I was past the first wave, but that was like, I was a legitimate, this is the greatest group I've ever heard. I mean, I was never like, there were friends of mine who just said that you couldn't listen to nothing else. So I had a friend once who argued you should only listen to Yes. And that doesn't make sense. So, but I literally loved them. I loved everything about them, and I associated them with my drug experiences. And Jerry Garcia very quickly became and still remains my favorite guitarist of all time.
What about you, Mike?
Yeah, I'm a little younger than Andy, but not much younger. So I was about 15 when I started buying albums. I think that I did the classic move of getting 10 albums for 10 cents from Columbia House.
Mm-hmm.
And I just happened to get the Skeletons in the Closet, the best of the Grateful Dead. And then shortly thereafter, the Grateful Dead played, it's a famous show at Englishtown in September 77. My cousin was going to work at the hotel where the band was staying. I'm 16 years old. Right. So I get there, the night before this show, and I had no idea how big this show was going to be. It turned out to be over 100,000 people. It was one of these big shows where the Grateful Dead actually performed well, a great show, because they at Woodstock and the one in New York, whatever that one was, they weren't happy with their sets. But this was a big show. I ended up meeting Jerry Garcia at breakfast.
Wow.
My cousin was a waitress, and she called the room when Jerry was there. I sat next to him. I got his autograph, which was later thrown out by my mother. And
oh, no.
But so talk about a sort of a baptism by fire. I go to see the Grateful Dead, 16 years old, 100,000 people, and it's a great show. And it was a formidable experience, and I've dipped in and out. I mean, the thing is, I was on board definitely from 77 to like 78, 79. And then what happened, I saw about 4 shows in the metro area. And then I saw what was happening. I was right there when the drum space thing was starting to happen.
Yes.
And I was not a fan of the drum space. I was not a fan of Brent Midland. So when you tell me that your friends got on board in the 80s, I'm like, what? Yeah, you missed it. I mean,
yeah.
I mean,
you don't have to be that cruel, Mike. I mean, you can be a little bit nicer about it.
Here's the thing: I try to be open-minded about,
right.
I'm sort of Keith and earlier. That's it for me.
Okay. But wait a second. I have to interject to tell you that I was at Englishtown. Do you know I was at that same concert?
Oh, you were at that show? Great.
Yeah, but go ahead. You finish the thing.
I didn't see you. There was 100,000 people. But it was a great show, right?
Well, no, I just wanted to say, because my story is completely different. I hitchhiked to Englishtown.
I want to hear it. Yeah.
I hitchhiked to Englishtown.
Wow. Okay.
Unbelievable. We were supposed to be driven all the way there. I had drugs in the car. New Jersey was the worst drug state in the country. We had marijuana. We had all this stuff. The guy who's supposed to take us all the way to Englishtown drops us off on the New Jersey Turnpike. Literally says, we can't go anymore. And so he drops us off. My friend Paul Gray, who was the lead guitarist in the band I was in, we got pulled over by the cops within 3 minutes. This could have been the end of my life.
Wow.
Looks through my friend's backpack,
Mhm.
lifts up the film vial of weed, and looks underneath it and puts the film vial back. Probably the only policeman in the country at that point who still think that
Wow.
film was held in those vials. And so I was almost arrested. And then the only other part of the story that's amazing is I always use that story about how, thank God there was no fentanyl in those days because we did everything. So I got to Englishtown, and as soon as I got there, someone said, these are great. You have to take 3. We didn't even know what I was taking. We just knew 2 wouldn't be enough. And then I remember having whippets. And I remember kind of the concert, but nothing like Mike remembers it.
No, but so how did you get to the show and get back?
I remember driving back with some friends from SUNY Binghamton, and I remember this doing whippets in the car all the way back.
Yeah, it's funny you mention whippets because I did go to another Grateful Dead show with my cousin. It was in Philadelphia at the Spectrum, and I wasn't doing drugs. I may be the only Grateful Dead fan who's never done LSD. I'm afraid of messing with my mind. I mean, I had some bad experiences on pot. I'm like, no, I'm not going harder to mess up my mind. But anyway, we got frisked at the door at the Spectrum, and my cousin's boyfriend got stopped. He had like balloons, and I'm like, what the hell? Why is this guy bringing balloons to the show? This is how naive I was.
Is that lingo? Wait, is that lingo? I don't remember.
I guess you fill up the balloon with the nitrous.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you do the hits from the balloon.
Yes,
there's some of this in the documentary.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's how naive I was. And I did go to a Giant Stadium show with 2 of my brothers. We were almost in a situation where this is bizarre. We stayed with a great aunt who lived in Secaucus, walking distance to Giant Stadium. So we had like a half pint of Southern Comfort. Me and my brother going back and forth with the Southern Comfort. We walked over to Giant Stadium, and it was too early. They hadn't opened the gates, but the fans had crashed the gates. And now the stadium wasn't even open. The gates were still down at the entrances to the stadium. So imagine a big mob just forming at the gate. We had field seats. We were on the field. And so we got into a situation, and it was, you heard about that Cincinnati Who show, right? The people that were crushed.
Yes.
We were in that same situation. We were in a giant crowd. The crowd would just sway, and you had no control over your body. And it was serious, and they recognized what was happening right away, and they opened the gates. At one point, my brother went down. I'm like, what the heck? Don't go down. You don't want to be close to the ground.
Wow,
man.
But I remember just being in a serious situation with that crowd. And that show was, you're talking about the state police. The state police somehow were backstage during that show, and there was a problem. So the Grateful Dead cut short that show, and it was because of a police presence backstage.
If you got a warrant, I guess you got to come in.
Good one.
Yeah, I think the documentary is kind of fascinating in a way because the first time I saw it, I wanted to understand the Grateful Dead. I didn't get it. I still kind of don't necessarily get the whole picture, but I wanted to be convinced. I was like, this, 6-part documentary is going to be my gateway into it. And the second time I saw it, when I knew that wasn't going to happen to me, I really think it's kind of an interesting documentary. It's so critical of some of the stuff they built into their scene. So not knowing much of the Grateful Dead, the film starts episode 1, act 1, and it starts with a cover. It must be from a live album of Death Don't Have No Mercy.
Yeah, it's from Live Dead.
So my interpretation is, what is this kind of weak vocal meandering guitar thing going on? Like it was a strange choice for me to be like, oh, this is the Grateful Dead. Like if you don't know who they are, this is what they sound like. But then I was talking to David Weissman, who came on the show, and he directed the Cockheads documentary. And he went to see this at the premiere of it at Sundance. And he said when the first song came on, he turned to his partner and was like, we're in good hands. He got it. You know, to him, it was the perfect song to start it. Do you have a sense of like that song and like why they chose it to introduce it?
Well, I would say, I mean, for one thing, I think if you're not a fan of the band, you can watch it as just a history of a band. The history of some individuals who put together a band, and they went on a wild ride, and I think it's interesting on that level. I mean, I think the editing, the music cues that they use throughout, it's fantastic. It's really, really, really good. I mean, I have some quibbles about things, and we can talk about that as we go along. But,
Right.
you know, I don't think you have to be a huge fan of the band to enjoy it.
No, the second time I saw it, I really enjoyed it because the pressure was off. I knew what I was going to get. I knew it wasn't going to sway me, but it is a long form documentary series. It kind of flew by the second time I saw it. The first time it was like homework because I kept trying to punctuate like, all right, this is the era I'm going to absorb and it's going to change me. Was the myth about, you know, the history of Jerry Garcia's childhood, was all that readily available as a fan?
No, I just want to say when I would, you know, it's like this is a story also of social media and everything else. We didn't have anything. In other words, like I just know lyrics of Scarlet Begonias in the last couple of years sometimes, like because you didn't have a place to check it. You weren't going to go to the World Book, you know, and to check to see what these things were. So we heard all of the things that we heard, okay? And in fact, when I was in college, before I was a comedian, I had come up with this line to myself about Pigpen, which I probably did for Tom Scharpling with Mike, is I said, you know, Pigpen, when I was a sophomore, they were like, Pigpen, he parties. He said they were going to give him a year to live, and he's still partying. And then when I was a junior, I was like, what a fucking idiot that Pigpen was. They told him he had a year to live,
right?
And he still drank himself to death.
Yeah.
So I kind of turned on him. Of course, you know, I'm not making an ultimate judgment about alcoholism because Pigpen not being really a great member of the band is something I didn't know when I first listened to it, because all I would know is the Mr. Charlie Told Me songs. I didn't know about the other parts of them. You're gonna get it, girl. And go get. I gotta have it in the morning. I gotta have it in the evening. 2 times. Who likes it in the basement?
I call Pigpen the original rapper. He was rapping. If you listen to some of those live shows from like say 71. And he'll do one of his extended raps in the middle of Good Lovin'. And he's telling all the guys in the audience, get your hands out of your pockets.
You got to get it.
You got to get it, but you get your hands out of your pockets. Quit playing pocket pool. That's what he literally tells them, quit playing pocket pool. So, I mean, he was giving good advice to these guys, you know? But as far as I'm concerned, as far as the information about the band, I've always, you know, consulted record guides and actually, I mean, of all the bands out there, the Grateful Dead have quite a literary, they're great books. The book Garcia by Blair Jackson is a great book.
I read that. That's a great book.
I just read this. This is a oral biography. This is all a dream we dreamed.
This is all a dream we dreamed.
Blair Jackson is one of the editors. It's an oral history. So, what's great about it, it's all these quotes from the different band members and the people surrounded the band, but you get such a distinct feel for the personalities for all the members, which in the documentary, it's not as clear cut, you know? I mean, by all accounts, Phil Lesh is an asshole. You know, that's why he's not part of Dead and Company and, you know, the bands that broke away after Garcia
See, this
died.
is new information, Mike. This is new information to me. I don't see from our guys up at Binghamton, we were like, we love Phil. We love those 2 songs he sang. So, but my image of, no, I'm being serious. My image of Box of Rain, my image of that he was the nicest guy in the band. But you're saying, no, you had different information.
Well, this is recent information. I didn't have that information at the time. I love Phil's contribution to the band. I'm not
But you didn't
not
know
that-
about this back then, right? When you
Oh
first
no,
listened to
no.
it. Right. Okay.
But things dribbled out. I mean, he had a liver transplant, right? I mean, he got into a serious drinking problem himself. But in some of these books I read, it turns out he doesn't get along with others very well.
In the documentary too, they kind of lean on he's a classical composer. Is that true?
Oh yeah, no, that's true. I mean,
Okay.
he came from a totally different musical background, but he just sort of liked what he saw was happening, and Garcia was interested in him and brought him in. Yeah.
At the beginning of the film, it's a lot of it is looking at him meeting Robert Hunter and their bluegrass movement era stuff. I did love that his girlfriend at the time was like, this bluegrass stuff is a drag. She was like really critical of it. Was like, it was boring. All they did was sit around. And they had some good band names. There was the Wildwood Boys, the Black Mountain Boys, the Asphalt Jungle Mountain Boys.
Is that with Grisman? Was that with David Grisman, or was that later?
I think David Grisman comes in later.
Because I was into all the stuff with Merle Saunders. I'm sure Mike was too, with Merle Saunders. All the Garcia bands.
Well, you can pick up "Old and in the Way."
Yes,
that's the full bluegrass album. That
Peter
Garcia
Rowan is on that.
Yeah, Peter Rowan's on.
And
there.
when was that?
That came out in the early '70s.
Okay.
It was like a one-off. Jerry was constantly in motion, so he would do these solo projects, and that was one of them. So if you want to, I mean, it's not that early bluegrass that you're alluding to, but he put together a bluegrass group. He wanted to do it again. And Old and in the Way, there's a couple CDs. I think there's a live one out. But that record came out in the '70s, early '70s.
Yeah, that I was in a band in college, and I wanted to be. I thought I would. I was a singer, songwriter, guitarist in 1978, and there just were only about 5 billion of us. And I played in the band, in the Red Rail and Nanuet, and Peter Rowan was in the band. And I'll never forget. They just kept. It's like that's where I knew. Not just I wasn't going to be a bluegrass musician, but I wasn't probably going to do a lot of things because they just played all the time. They played all the time, whether they were on stage or and that's why I got that feeling of Jerry when he was, how much he played, so that his brilliant solos don't come from him having to try. He has all this incredible technique. He wouldn't need any more technique. I just love him so much.
Yeah,
right.
Sorry for going on.
No, that's what we're here for. I mean, it's such a chemistry band, and the documentary is interesting too because I kind of thought going into it that it was going to be a lot more heavy-handed with the actual members talking throughout. And actually, you get very little of like Bob Weir. You get very little of Phil. You get very little of the two drummers. The story's kind of told through the archival footage.
Can we talk about the people who we get too much of?
Absolutely. Yeah, who would that be?
Not Donna Gatshaw.
No, none of the band members. And I agree with you. Yeah, for a 4-hour documentary, the band members themselves don't really get a lot of time.
No.
I mean, because they're showing archival film, which is great. A lot of that stuff, most fans probably have never seen before.
Right.
So that was all great. But I mean, I could have done without so much. Dennis McNally, he does that thing that Tom Scharpling always hates when somebody talks about their sports team, and they're like, "We did it," even though Dennis McNally's doing that "we" thing. You weren't in the band. You were an employee.
Right.
You were an employee of the band, but he's doing that. Yeah, we couldn't do this. We couldn't do that. It's like, no, you weren't in the band, Dennis.
Right.
And his book, I read that book, and that book is a snooze. I read the other books I recommended. His book is a snooze. Oh, I also want to mention another book. If you want to get the dirt about the dead, Living with the Dead.
Okay.
That sounds good.
Living with the Dead, Rock Scully.
All right, sure.
He was a roadie, and he gets into all the behind the scenes dirt, and even down to Jerry's hygiene problems later.
Have you read the Altamont book that came out recently?
Oh no, there's an Altamont.
Yeah,
book?
It's really great, and it talks about the Stones really leaning on the dead. They were like, how do we get a piece of this counterculture that's happening over there? Like, we're kind of out of step and we want to be part of this. And
So they took the Dead's advice about
they
security.
did. They flew over Rock to have a meeting with him, and he got arrested at the border in England, was in jail. They got him out, and then Keith Richards was like, "You got to go get your suitcase because you have that weed we've been hearing about, the California weed." So they sent him back in to get it. And he basically was giving him a tutorial on, like, this is how we run things. This is how we police things. The Golden Gate Bridge Park people are great, and we're good with the city. And so they were super optimistic. It's a really great book, and a lot of it is about the Dead's influence and then the way they backed away from the situation, too.
I just wanted to say one thing before I forget. My favorite story was about the guy I can't remember his name. It's one of my favorite songs, and it's one of my favorite. Mike will know. He leaves. He's in charge of the soundboard.
Oh yeah.
Leaves
The sound guy. He's the guy in the sound truck.
I love that story
so
much.
That's a great story. Morning Dew.
Really, Morning Dew. Because he goes out and Jerry catches his eye that he's there, and he goes back, and it just happens to be one of the great. It's just, you cannot have a better live Dead thing than that song.
Yeah, I wish there were more stories like that. I mean, in the Dennis McNally book, I'm gonna slam it again. the only thing I remember being interesting, he talked about how Phil and Bill, Bill and Phil got into an argument over what is stronger, steel or iron, or no steel or the metals, like. But apparently it was like a big fight, and I'm like, wait a second, you're just going to mention that in a sentence and not give us a full chapter on it. But anyway.
But Mike, do you remember that story where they talk about, is it the Grateful Dead movie? I'm not sure, where Jerry talks about he got in a big fight with Phil. They knocked him down the stairs, and normally we get along great. And then they later use that cut on the album. That's the only time where I ever heard like Phil getting into any kind of. Does that ring a bell to anyone?
No, that one, I don't remember that story.
I think that's maybe the Grateful Dead movie where he talks about he came back and that was one of the best.
Why is Mountain Dew such a beloved song? Why is that?
Morning Dew.
Yeah,
I got my Mountain Dew here. Sorry, I got my code red.
I'll take the first shot. Take the first shot of this. I'm trying to convey to you, or anybody here, that I actually came of age with the Grateful Dead. So I was probably on acid at a thing, and that's an apocalyptic song. It's like the thing I didn't understand. The thing I did understand was it was so celebratory. Robert Hunter's lyrics could be so dark, and both ways. So that song actually is like I
don't want to correct you, be a nitpicker, but Morning Dew is actually a cover. That's a cover song. It was originally a folk.
Right. But what the subject matter, he goes, it sounds to me like it's talking about like after a nuclear thing or something like that.
Oh yeah, no, that's what the song's about. Yeah, definitely.
Right. So I didn't mean to say they wrote it, but you see, and that's the other thing. So many of these songs came like I Know You Rider, Not Fade Away. I heard that through the Dead. I didn't even know it through so I heard so much stuff. And the thing is, I just want to say that anybody who will listen is, if you love country music, real country music, as much as I love it, like original Hank Williams and John Prine and all those people, the Dead brought so much of that to the world. Not just the Dead. There was also the New Riders of the Purple Sage and stuff like that. But they really did open up the world.
Oh yeah, I think they're quintessential American band because they cover all these different genres. I mean, I was introduced through Mama Tried. It was a Merle Haggard cover they would do. They did covers of Hank Williams, Chris Christopherson. And then they also did blues. They did blues covers. That's where that was kind of Pigpen's specialty. He was the blues guy. They're sort of bringing all the different musics together to form their own take on it.
It's interesting. I really gravitate to the slower, moodier pieces. And then when they're doing like Good Loving or kind of the up stuff.
I don't think the Good Loving stuff, I think the blues stuff and the good loving stuff is they did. Not that they couldn't do great blues, but it was the weakest thing about what they did. It's almost like looking at Pigpen go, you got to have it, you got to get it. It's like, that's not what you remember the Dead about. That they were like, hey, let's go,
Yeah.
you know.
But they were really into that energy, though, at a certain
yeah.
point, weren't they? I mean, they also really liked that kind of up party vibe.
Actually, I just committed myself not too long ago to listening to all the Europe 72 shows.
Oh, wow.
And you know, as a fanatical fan, I have to say that is peak Grateful Dead.
Yep.
You know, if you want to hear them at their best, even Pigpen's at his best. He's only got like another year to live,
Right.
but maybe that's why his vocals are so sort of soulful for the most part. But here's the one thing you have to do listening to those shows. Maybe listen to one Good Lovin' just to see what it was. But then every other show, when they do Good Lovin', you can skip it.
Yeah, you can skip it. That's right.
Or
Johnny Be Good. Johnny Be Good, right?
Well, yeah, I never understood. That's why I always refer to the Grateful Dead as a great bar band, because they never gave up their covers. And,
Right.
yeah, Johnny Be Good. I mean, come
That's
on.
not a great cover.
And then, that would be their encore. They just come out. They do a phenomenal show. They just did some wild 45-minute Dark Star, and then they're gonna wrap it all up with Johnny Be Good. It's like, wow.
I always thought like sometimes they go, that's how, let's do whatever we want to do. I don't think they really ever cared or thought about what they were doing in that way, which I think is one of the great things about them. They weren't a calculated band in any way.
Well, but if you listen to enough shows, and I'm in that rare category.
You are, and I must say, you are in a category I am not in, even though I listened all the way. I listened all the way through college, and I was in college. Went to college, Europe 72, and I went to college in 75. So, but not how you've listened to.
Yeah, I mean, there isn't a formula, but there is a trend. So, like the opening, they always did two sets. The opening set was sort of succinct for the most part, songs, standalone songs, and then the second set would be, they warm up with a couple songs, and then they go into the jam where you get 4 or 5 songs, one after the other. They'd all be linked. And then, usually, towards the end, you get a phenomenal Dark Star, or the other one, the long exploratory jams that would go really out there.
Oh, great.
And then they bring it all back with a ballad. It would come back to a ballad to calm everybody down who were tripping out.
Well, Scarlet Begonias is an example. I don't know if that's a ballad, but they go a long way.
Well,
right?
What happened, they also would have, they would double songs. Certain songs would go together. So Scarlet Begonias and Fire on the Mountain became like, they always did those together with a nice jam. The famous one is the Cornell Show, 5/8/77. Everybody goes to that. Actually, it's on the soundtrack for this documentary. If you want, the soundtrack for this documentary is actually quite good.
I know. I have the soundtrack.
Yeah,
I have it. Who am I? I have it myself, Mike, at home.
but if you want to just like find out about the Grateful Dead, the soundtrack to this documentary is very good.
What about the early days, like when there were the Warlocks and kind of figuring out their sound? Have you listened to much of that?
Very little. And from my end, it's like, I know that almost as if a tourist would know that. It's like, to me, very, 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 very fast. But I never really heard much of it.
Well, they're part of that. I mean, some of that stuff is with the first box sets. I got those box sets. There were 2 box sets. And the first box set has all that stuff. And it's garage rock. It's, it's the 60s psychedelic garage rock sound, which some people like that. That's the only stuff they like by the Grateful Dead, but I don't go back to that too often.
It's interesting that the documentary doesn't touch on any of the other San Francisco scene that was happening. They don't talk about the Jefferson Airplane or Moby Grape or anything that was going on. I thought that was kind of an interesting oversight in a way.
I don't even know about Moby Grape, though. I mean, is Moby Grape ultimately, what could you say about him, would be my question. I'm seriously asking it.
Yeah, they're a smaller band, but there was definitely in the scene and beloved. And
you mean like the Airplane? Not the Airplane, right?
Yeah, Jefferson Airplane was part of the same scene. Yeah,
and Santana and things like that.
Yeah, well, I think they wanted to stay focused. I mean, it was going to be sprawling as it is. And there's lots of stuff they leave out, you know. I wish they would have delved into the infamous incident. Mickey Hart's father, he came on board to be, you know, their business manager, and they discovered that he was stealing from them. And Mickey felt so embarrassed by the incident. That's why Mickey Hart leaves the band in 71. Yeah, I think 71. And he doesn't come back until 74. And it was because of his father.
Is He's Gone written about? I thought that was a sad song about someone they loved, and now I heard it's a song about Mickey Hart's father.
Oh, He's Gone. He's Gone.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
it's
that's true.
It is true, huh? Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
It was written. It was written about Mickey Hart's father, and then Pigpen just happened to die, and then sort of it kind of became that too. But the classic, and I think I only found this out in the book I recommended earlier, was that not only was Mickey Hart's father stealing from them, when he realized that they were onto him, he literally stole the office furniture and got out of Dodge.
Did they hold that against Mickey? Did they hold that against Mickey?
No, they didn't hold it against Mickey, actually. But Mickey left. He wasn't fired. He left out of embarrassment, you know. And it's understandable, you know. Your father's, you know, come on.
Yeah, that's in the Altamont book too. Yeah, he was really just hurt. I mean, he was just it's his dad, you know. All of a sudden, it was like, and he felt accountable. It's funny, Sam Cutler, who was their manager.
Oh, I love him.
Yeah, he was amazing, and he was the manager for the Stones when they came over for that U.S. tour. But you know, he just would say things like, "The Grateful Dead are a dumb band. Like they were children, you know. I was trying to teach them how to be adults. They were children."
He doesn't pull any punches.
I know. And I thought right away. I mean, that's episode 2 where he starts showing up. This film, I think, is pretty brave in the way that they do pick on their own band a lot. Like they made a lot of mistakes.
Yeah, but there's certain things, again, you know, I think it's a great documentary, but you know, you wonder about the choices, right? Mm-hmm. So they sort of glom on this sort of romantic story with Jerry, even though it has a sort of brutal ending, with the young woman he met when he was, you know, she was 16 or something, right?
Right.
And he knew her 30 years, and they get married 30 years later or something. Barbara Meyer, I believe her name is. And that's a nice little story, but you know, he was married to 2 other women who don't even get interviewed at all. So it's like, why?
His daughter was interviewed, right?
What's that?
Yes.
His daughter's interviewed.
Yeah.
One of his daughters, yeah. And she's calling him Jerry throughout, and it's like, okay.
Yeah.
Did you call your father by his first name? I wasn't calling my father by his first name.
Well, I was involved, Mike, not to interrupt, but I just did. But I was really like, it's hard for me to separate me as a fan from me now, because I love Jerry Garcia so much. Mm-hmm. I really was I was crushed when Lennon died. That was the worst thing that ever happened that far in my life. But I loved Jerry so much. So I always was rooting. You know, I read the Jerry book that he wrote. There's a book of his that I read. So I was always rooting for him. You know, it must have been rough to be, you know, it must have been a rough situation. You know,
I mean, by all accounts, he was not a family man.
Right.
You know, and so his relationships with his wives, with his children, were strained, to say the least, you know. Yeah, he's not a perfect individual, that's for sure. But his music, you know, will live on, you know. And I'm with you.
I also want to make the point that if we don't make the point at some point, is that you really can't separate Robert Hunter. I know there were other lyricists too, and there were other good lyricists, but Robert Hunter, to me, you know, I listened to the song U.S. Blues. There's no more revolutionary song that's been sung about America. Saying how fucked up America is. Mm-hmm. You know, I'm Uncle Sam, that's who I am. And it's like, I remember, again, when I would listen to it, I was, that U.S. Blues, but it's a very, very negative song. Mm-hmm. You know, it's a true song about how America has all these horrible things that we've done, but we're just kind of moving on. And so he really, I think, is such a spiritual. I can't think of anyone who has better lyrics in all of music than him, Robert. And I love Dylan and him too, but really the heart and soul of what their message was in some way, or what I took as their message.
I think it's a great partnership. The songwriting, I like it. The lyrics are so evocative. They came through the Vietnam War, so they're of that era, and with good reason. They were protesting certain things going on in the culture.
When did they start using his lyrics? How early?
Very early.
Okay.
He wrote Dark Star, which is, that's one of their, keystone songs.
He was on the first couple records.
Maybe not the first couple.
Moxo. How do you say that? Moxo.
Don't even try.
Oxa Moxa?
Okay.
I call it Oxa Moxa.
Yeah, Amoxa Oxima. I think there's like another syllable.
Do you guys like those first couple records when they were still kind of a little more psych driven and figuring things out?
I can listen to Anthem of the Sun.
Mm-hmm.
There's kind of a long. That was sort of pieced together from live shows, so it's got some of their jammed out stuff. But those early, Live Dead really sort of kicked them off, and then of course, everybody knows American Beauty,
and Working Man's Dead, right? They're
those are the two. Yeah.
Classic, unbelievable albums to me.
Right.
Studio albums.
Yeah.
I didn't mean to cut you off there. What am I
we're
doing there?
good. We're good. We're excited.
I wanted to ask you, Mike, what is that sound in Unbroken Chain? I'm trying to tell my wife what it is. It's like it sounds like a synthesizer, but it's a sound that goes. Do you know what I'm talking about? It's like
Jerry began to experiment with different filters, I guess, on his guitar, and I think he's even quoted as saying that he wanted to get his guitar to sound like a horn.
Wow.
So like you'll hear that like on Terrapin Station. Maybe he started on that particular song. I haven't listened to that song in a while. But
and how solid are those like albums? How many great albums did they have? Mars Hotel. I mean, they had a series of great albums, which people probably, I don't know if they would think of them as having great albums.
Well, the songs, there's great songs up through, to me, Terrapin Station. Terrapin Station was the first album I got when it came out, and then I got Shakedown Street when it came out, and I was like, felt
That's
like
kind of the funky disco-y kind of.
Yeah, they did Shakedown Street as their disco song, but it became a beloved song. I mean, but when it came out, it was all that sort of disco backlash was going on.
Sure.
Not that I had anything against disco, but it was weird when like these rock groups were doing the disco. It's like they were cashing out. They were selling out.
Isn't it true that Marvin Gaye's song that was a big hit, he made as a response to his record label telling him to come up with something more disco?
Possibly, yeah. I mean, that was the craze at the time. That was what was selling. So yeah, I'm sure everybody was being pushed in that direction.
He wrote it as a joke. If I'm right, he wrote it as a joke, and it became and it's a great song. You got to give it up. I think it is.
Okay. Oh yeah. Right. Okay. Yeah.
And you hear people partying in the background. Marvin Gaye was angry at the note from the thing, and it turned out. I'm not saying that means the suits should be constantly.
Oh, I didn't know that history to that song. That makes sense, though. That's great. It became a hit. Yeah, I love that song. But yeah, that's funny.
I wanted to ask you, because they don't really get into process in this film about like how we write songs or how they listen to each other on stage when they're doing these things, or how the two drummers, like to me, I hear the two drummers and I can't really tell who's doing what, or if one drummer.
I have a problem with that, Mike. I mean, I like the drum sound, but I do have a problem figuring out what each person's. I think Kreutzmann's basically the main. I don't know what I'm saying, but I never could figure out how it put together.
After years of listening to live shows, I've come to the conclusion, and a lot of fans won't like this, that when Mickey Hart left, that's the beginning of the best era. And unfortunately, that's also around the time Pigpen died. So my favorite era for the Grateful Dead is the one drummer era, July 16th, 1972. Through 10/19/74. To me,
so everybody on Europe 72, the whole Europe.
Well, Europe 72 is earlier 72, and Pigpen's still there. Those shows are great. except for those good lovins, which is like a black hole in the middle of the show.
Right.
you just like, and I listened to every one of them. And actually, it's funny, over the course of those shows, the Grateful Dead even sort of realized, hey, the good lovins aren't cutting it. And by the end of that tour, yeah, good lovin' isn't being played at the end of the tour, you know.
Is that a Donna and Keith era too, or was that?
Yeah.
Yes.
Donna and Keith come on like I think towards the end of '71.
Okay, so you're cool with them?
They're
Yeah,
great.
no,
they're
that's
great. He's
That's
a
my
great
favorite
piano
era.
player.
Yeah.
Okay.
We used to make fun back then. We made fun. Everybody. I'm just telling you, like the temperature of Dead fans. A lot of Dead fans made fun of her voice. You know what I mean? Like there was a very misogynist, kind of a following that
They
the
still
Dead had.
do. Her
Yeah.
nickname when people talk about the show is Donna the Destroyer. Because, you know, playing in the band was the song she would come in and she would do a lot of, you know, and she's even acknowledged that she couldn't hear herself.
Right.
And, you know, she's acknowledged that when she listens to those recordings, she understands the criticism because she couldn't stay in pitch.
The piano playing was incredible, and there's a couple of songs that where it's like anything that people make fun of. You know, it's like everybody in the Dead fans that I knew, we all would leave at the drum solo or smoke a joint. I mean, nobody ever like sat riveted. I always thought that they did it to give the band a break, the guys in the band a break.
Yeah, that was part of it. Did you get into the trading of tapes, Andy, or
No.
never
I
went
just
that far?
What's the one where it's Bill Graham introducing him? That was one of the first I think, the protagonist. It was like it was when trucking. Bob Weir goes, trucking was a number one in California. So it's like those were our iconic things. I thought those were the only things that they were. And then my friends' were total deadheads. I mean, maybe I would not be here today if I'd gone that far in.
Right. I have a question for you, Andy. I mean, the band are playing, you know, under the influence. You were talking about the bands you were in. Did you ever play on LSD?
Oh my God! Look, I'm not defending it. I'm not saying it was good. This is a totally true story. We were playing a naked show. I don't know why we were playing a naked show, but it was playing a naked show. Everybody was naked. I had a tab of LSD. This is a totally true story. I dropped the tab, and that was the end of the world for me because that's all I cared about. And I found the tab, blotter acid, sitting on the top of a little piece of grass. Boom. Into the mouth.
You sure you weren't already high when you fell into this trance looking for it?
No, it does sound like. Well, I don't want to put you guys out, but I have had my friend and I both had the same hallucination when we were high once. We both thought that we had torn down these doors, and then we ran away, and then we ran back, and they hadn't been torn down. So
yeah,
I can't think of anything more amazing than that. But that's really what I saw. I mean, that's how I can't separate the Dead from the fact that I really did think they were the great, and I still think they were the greatest in many ways. I feel like I honor everything I felt about them. You know,
I can't say the whole career of the Dead lives up to that, but the Dead at their peak is one of my favorite. Yeah, obviously one of my favorite bands. And I grew up with the Dead. You know, I discovered them very early, and for the most part, they've been in my life. In the '80s, I got away from them. You know, what brought me back were the Dix Picks. You know, because I wasn't a tape collector, so they started releasing official releases of shows, and I'm like, holy cow! You know, it was like a whole new world. And then the collectors, once the CD era started, they were collecting shows, and these shows are soundboards, so the sound is phenomenal.
Wow! Yeah,
you know, so I've got all these soundboard shows on CD. I've got binders. Oh,
where were you finding these? How were you connecting with people? How were you trading these at the time?
There was a show on WBAI, Morning Dew. It so happened to be called. It was on midnights on Saturdays, and they would play Grateful Dead shows. It was like a little Dead group, and then they had a website, and then all the guys on the website. And I say guys, one thing I like about the Grateful Dead, and you see it in this there, there's lots of women fans, right? I mean, it's not a sausage party. You go to some indie rock show, it's a sausage party. But you see all these women at the Grateful Dead shows, so they had a broad audience.
The misogyny was old school misogyny. Like, I mean, we can share the women, we can share the wine.
Well, okay.
I mean,
Well,
it's like something,
yeah,
but they weren't like that as guys. They weren't.
But I'll defend that
bros.
song because it's a character in his song.
True.
You know,
True.
that's not Bob Weir. Bob Weir isn't sharing. Well, maybe he did, but you know, but I can give it the distance that these are characters in songs when they're singing those lyrics.
Right.
And there's lots of cowboy lyrics, and you know.
I'm going to talk about Bob Weir a bit because, you know, you talk about your love for Jerry and him being an incredible guitar player, and, you know, his voice is, you know, I think my favorite when I hear this stuff. Bob gets kind of a bad rap in a funny way, and then sometimes you hear stuff and sometimes it seems apt. Do you feel like Bob Weir is as essential as anyone else in this band?
I'll answer first because Michael will have a better answer, but I would say I love his rhythm guitar playing. I always loved his rhythm guitar playing.
Mm-hmm.
I always loved him as a person. I always felt like you loved him, but I don't like the singing of. To me, Jerry Garcia is one of the greatest singers of all time because I grew up on Dylan. I love that kind of voice. And Bob kind of leaves me cold. Well, there's mosquitoes on the river. Boom, boom, bang, bang.
Well, it got even worse with Brent Midland, where I listened to, like I said, I'll dip into some of these later era shows just to check myself, you know, because people love these shows.
Is Garcia alive? Is Garcia alive during?
Yeah. I listened to their famous shows, July 2nd and July 3rd, 1988. And I listen to these shows, and I'm a fan. You know, I don't want to be.
You don't have to be sold.
But Bob's vocals deteriorated significantly in the '80s. I love his singing in that peak period I'm talking about.
Playing in the band.
He wrote some great songs with his partner, Barlow, he's sort of a weird presence in this documentary, right? I mean, he's kind of like the biggest critic. He's really kind of slamming him. I don't know if he got a bad deal on royalties or something. but anyway, he's got a chip on his shoulder through this whole documentary. But I'll say this about Bob Weir. You know, when he was at his peak, those songs serve a purpose. Like I have a hard time listening to Jerry Garcia's solo shows because every song is 10 minutes long or longer. And it just drains you, you know. It's so those little short bursts of Bob Weir in between the Jerry songs, you know, it's like, okay, you get a little enervated again, you know. It's like you're not in a long jam song after long jam song after, you know, that gets tiring to me. I mean, I love some of the stuff in the solo Garcia stuff.
Yeah, Merle Saunders stuff I really love.
Yeah, there's some great stuff.
And there's stuff, but I know exactly what you're saying. And it really is like a Lennon McCartney thing. It's really like I don't think you can separate. Well, you probably can't separate. You can't separate Phil Lesh out of it either. I don't think.
Yeah.
You can't get into those discussions. But Bob Weir, definitely what Mike is saying is absolutely true. And I loved, and I like, you know, worship the ground that Jerry walked on, you know. Right. And I want to say that if you're ever at a live concert, like I was high in English Town or whatever, there is nothing like the sound of Jerry's guitar live outdoors.
Yeah. Did you guys see the Wall of Sound, or was that only for?
No,
Europe?
that was 74.
Okay.
And that I was too young.
Okay.
They actually, I mean, I talked to people who they played a couple shows in Jersey City. You know, famous shows in Jersey City. The Dead have like a real strong connection with the East Coast, different parts of the country. But the East Coast was like one of the first areas to embrace them. And they played here multiple times. But I spoke to people who went to shows at Jersey City, Roosevelt Stadium is where they played. And they also played, it's a Jehovah's Witness center now. It was a theater at the time, the Stanley Theater in Jersey City, right on Journal Square. Famous September 72 show that came out as a regular release. I recommend that show. People think it's one of their best. Jersey City, New Jersey. But anyway, what I was going to say about Bob is that, you know, his voice just deteriorated. And I listened to these 88 shows. He started doing lots of Bob Dylan covers. and he did Stuck Inside a Mobile with the Memphis Blues again on 7/2/88. And
What
the
a memory!
vocal,
What a memory! I'm just kidding because I
no,
know you
I
have
got
written
notes
down.
here. You see me looking down. I wrote down some notes, and you should listen to it just for the comedic value, Andy, and also I'm going to attempt to do his, and then on 7/3/88 they do Estimated Profit, which is one of my favorite songs, and they did that in combination with Eyes of the World, which I think
Eyes of the World is
that may be my all-time favorite song.
I'm with you on that. I am
Yeah.
with you on that. That's
A
Robert
beautiful
Hunter, right?
song. Yeah, Jerry and Robert. And so they did that, and at the end of Estimated Profit, Bobby starts doing not in his song. It's like nah, at the end. Andy, I don't know if you remember, but Bob Weir starts going, and I'm doing it justice. That's what it sounds like, and I'm like, what the hell is going on? So Bobby, he, God bless him, they were able to keep it going, and they got bigger to the end, which is more amazing. But that ties into what you said, Chris, that at a certain point, that became a party band, and the party was more important than the band. And I think that's what your friends were going through. Hey, there's this great party whenever the Grateful Dead came, and you didn't even have to go into the show. You stayed in the parking lot. They talk about this in the documentary, where they had to tell people to stay away.
It's amazing
because it was getting out of control.
Yeah, I have the one of the letters, the audio letters they were telling people. It says, so the Grateful Dead, this is coming from them, except Jerry, who refused to sign it. It says, if you don't have a ticket, don't come. This is first a music concert, not a free-for-all party. Secondly, don't vend. Vending attracts people without tickets. Many of the people without tickets have no responsibility or obligation to our scene. They don't give a shit. They act like idiots. They think this is a party to get trashed at. It's up to you as deadheads to educate these people, to pressure them into acting like deadheads instead of maniacs. Want to end the touring life of the Grateful Dead? Want it to continue? Listen to rules and pressure others to do so. And that part, I didn't know that it was just like that. It was just so out of hand.
I didn't know that either. I did not know that.
Yeah. Oh, no. Like, I think there was a show in Indianapolis where they literally just sort of broke the fence down, and it turned into an ugly scene with arrests and so on. And yeah, it was getting, we're talking about after their big hit with Touch of Grey. And they actually call those people touch heads because they were late era fans that came on board, when Touch of Grey became a pop
Which
hit.
I have to say,
Touch heads.
I love that song because I love
it's
the
a great
Grateful Dead.
song. Yeah,
I know. Can you imagine like Touch of Grey bringing all this out?
Well, it's just that it's put them on the map with young people, and it brought in a new audience, and they weren't cool to the scene yet,
It makes you want to tear down something, that song, doesn't it? It just makes you want to just break things. And
Is that Elvis? Is he doing like an Elvis? What is he doing when he does that?
I don't know, but Brent. I was never a big fan of Brent Midland. He sounded like literally like middle of the road. Michael McDonald seemed to be his inspiration. And on one of these '88 shows, he literally sounds like he's doing a Bruce Springsteen impression. I'm like, really? You had a Bruce Springsteen phase too?
What years are you talking?
I only went to shows 77, 78.
Okay.
Yeah, it was short lived because then I discovered The Clash and Elvis Costello and Talking Heads. Then I went on that journey.
Right.
I was working in New York in the 80s. I always knew when the Dead were in town because you'd see people walking around barefoot in Manhattan, which is like, okay, it's like, is that very smart?
Was it enjoyable being in that audience? I mean, in the film, they talk about like the fill zone and the spin zone and where the wharf rats are, where they, do the 12-step program. Was that in place when you're going to the show, or did that come in the 80s?
I didn't go to enough to know, and the English town, I didn't even remember it.
Okay,
but Mike I'm sure could answer that.
No, I was. These are literally the first concerts I went to, so I didn't know the lore. It was I was just a teenager.
Yeah, I'd heard about them. That's my friends would come back and just talk about these different zones. The spinners are over here.
Oh, yeah.
And And then the film, they map it all out.
Yeah, that one guy who makes the comparison to the Buddhist Mandalay or whatever that. I mean, come on, that guy was a little ridiculous. It's like, all right, you just say that there were different sections. I get that, but don't try and make it into this other thing. The other guy who sort of annoyed me in the documentary, Steve Parrish. I mean, he's God bless him. He was with him, all those years, and so he's a witness. I get it. But there's something about his personality, it's just sort of annoying. And I still see him pop up. I saw an ad for Fender. I think he's wearing the same clothes that he wore in the documentary 7 years later, But I get it. He was part of it, so I would have preferred more Sam Cutler than him. And then he goes on this little thing about his drug explorations. And not to knock your drug explorations, Andy.
No,
but,
because it's really, it's legendary almost.
But Steve Parrish really just goes on about, how he was enlightened and so on. But, it's like, you're right, to each his own. You had this experience. But how do you know that experience isn't just the drugs? Maybe you're being fooled by the drugs. This is coming from a guy who didn't want to partake.
Right, but you see also, Mike, you're more, we've had different backgrounds, so you're more cynical. I came in, grew up in a time period where we were like, I wanted to believe in God, but my father told me I was an idiot. So, I mean, I kind of it was part of my spiritual growth going along and experiencing this thing. So I think it's amazing that it's like Mike loves them. He doesn't love them in a way that's less effective because I was wasted, right? So it's that transcendence I find kind of cool.
Their songs are definitely spiritual, and there's something you can sort of, like I said, the lyrics are evocative. They're not specific. So, some will tell little stories, and so you're left to interpret it. Everybody can interpret it their own way, which is what I think all great art. It sort of leaves you room. It's not sort of hammering you over the head like this is what this song means, So, yeah. And I guess that's part of what Robert Hunter in the documentary, he doesn't want to talk about it, right?
Right.
He's sort of always been reluctant, and he shouldn't be explaining things for people, let it live,
Yeah.
Also, Chris, let me just say I'm sorry. I just want to say, smash the notion though, that they didn't, anybody who measures art by technique or whatever, they were fucking great. And they were great in every level. And the fact that they, maybe Donna Gadshaw sounded weird or whatever. I just don't like people who try to oversimplify them or not get that they were amazing. They weren't classic. They weren't playing Beethoven, but who cares? They were the pinnacle of what they were doing. And I think sometimes they don't get credit for that. I don't know.
I think a lot of the criticism that they get is associated because they grew up in the hippie era, right? So, right. I mean, there was a period where, there was a backlash against the hippies, it's like, the punks were sort of anti-hippie, let's say. And so that all happened. And it's like, to me, I like both, it's right. Like I grew up with the Dead, then I got into the Clash and, all those bands. And it's like, why do I have to be on one team or the other? It's like, it's all music, right?
Well, in the film, Al Franken is talking about this specific song. It's called Althea. Althea.
Yeah.
And it's this specific show. This is the one. This is the best one. What would be the one song from a live concert that you would want to introduce to someone?
Scarlet Begonias, Fire on the Mountain from the soundtrack. That's from the Cornell 5877. That's one of the major arguments. Is that the best Dead show ever? It's up there. I like it a lot.
What makes it the best Dead show?
Well, it's the performances are great. The song selection, there's a great Morning Dew on there. If you like that song, Andy, have you heard that show?
I mean, think so.
You can find all these shows on YouTube now. That's the amazing thing. You don't have to throw yourself into some collecting group anymore. It's all on YouTube.
Yeah, I got the class. I mean, I got most of the things like Dick's Picks, all those things, everything, Bear's Choice, all the, I basically got the main things that came out. I never really was
well, they did officially release 5877. So yeah, I mean, you can find it.
I want to hear it.
Yeah.
Are any of them in the documentary?
Well, the Scarlet Fire, I think they play some of that in there.
Okay, that's unbelievable. That's an
And
unbelievable
that
version.
Althea, that's like a Brent era song, but that is a nice song. It's not my number one. I would have picked an Eyes of the World.
Eyes of the World. I cannot speak more highly about the uplifting, incredible. And I know I'm bad when I get into this vein because you're like, just shut up, Andy. Or maybe that's myself saying that to myself.
Yeah.
But just this uplifting, incredible spiritual feel to that song. And also a lot of major sevens. I can also play that song nicely. I sound like I'm on fire when I hit those major seven songs because I'm not going up against diminished nine.
Now we got to hear this. You got to put this up on
Totally.
YouTube.
Put it in the show notes.
I would. Okay, I'll do it. I'm ready.
Excellent. Well, wait. Go get your guitar.
Okay, hold on, guys. You know what's amazing though, that they could, and as long as you want to say people, because I was in bands in that era, and you could not tune. I couldn't tune. You couldn't tune when you were high, and you didn't have tuners. And so anybody who was tuned well, or maybe McCartney or whatever, it's a miracle. I just want to say anybody who played in that era where you didn't have a tuner deserves a little more zets.
And actually, that's a big part of the live shows. They're always tuning between the songs.
Oh, really?
They are.
There's lots of tuning going on. Yeah, you catch a lot of tuning.
What's the best tuning recording? What date?
I don't know. I think some. The fans are so fanatics. I think somebody literally put out 90 minutes of tuning.
Wow.
Of the Grateful Dead. Look around. I think you can find that.
That's incredible.
And all the Dead shows are up on archive.org. I'm not familiar with that. That's, all that stuff is live. So even the shows that haven't been released, all the audience recordings. I mean, that's the other thing about these Deadheads. I mean, and to a degree, I'm part of it. Like I said, I went through this phase collecting these shows on CD. I went nuts. I mean, I look at that back on that period, and there was other stuff going on in my life, but it was like a nice distraction. I just kind of focused in on this. I didn't have to think about other problems going on. Just was collecting these shows like a madman. Some of them I don't think I've ever listened to. I was collecting. I wasn't even listening to them at a certain point.
Well, it seems like the Dead have done a really good job, and maybe I'm wrong, but with their legacy compared to a lot of bands like the Rolling Stones, where you're like, where are all these demos that I hear you have in these vaults, and they just won't put them out because of legal problems with ABCO and things like that. It seemed like really early the Dead kind of figured out the best way to run their show.
And so what's the lifetime thing? Lifetime thing, Mike? Don't you think what they did? It's a once.
Well, it's amazing that they had the forethought. Yeah, I mean, like Chris is saying, not most bands think that every show is going to be worth something, but they had the forethought to record, and part of the recording process was part of because they would listen back to shows for what they did in certain shows. Yeah, it would have been nice to have more of that stuff in the documentary. But the fact that they saved all these things, that it's archived, and there's some sort of facility in San Francisco, I think. It's like hurricane and earthquake proof. But so all the Dead tapes will survive an apocalypse. We're safe. We'll know that for sure. But,
and Johnny Carson and the Tonight Show will also be, because they have their own vault.
Oh, do they have a vault?
Yes,
Johnny Carson. Oh, that's great. Oh, that's good to know.
Oh wow! So after the nuclear meltdown, the children of the future will be. Those will be the two touchstones for future generations.
Johnny and Jerry will be the gods of the future.
I just want to say one thing before I forget. This was so interesting because Mike is younger than me. So in 1978, I was 21 years old. I moved from New York City to LA, and I wanted to be, the next Dylan, whatever I wanted to be. And I got into the Talking Heads, and I got into all those bands. So I felt like, oh my God, I had missed the 70s. But the thing is, what I'm saying is that collision, it was never a collision between, oh, I don't like the Dead music anymore, but just the fact that my own personal life, I wanted to be a professional musician. And I came out at the age of 21. I wasn't going to go to Madame Wong's West. I mean, when I started comedy, it was I started on it and it went on. But music I was so scared of, and a lot of it was because I was 21 in 1978, but I wasn't making Talking Head style music, So it's just a weird thing. Because everything does feel so personal sometimes. Because I try to sell everybody that my life really should be the major life everyone looks at time from. We should all have been 7 when JFK was shot. You know what I'm saying? We should all have. In other words, so we're all part of my generation, but I know that that's not true. It's just a wish. I'm kidding, guys. Hello? Hello. What
No,
is it? And this is going to turn into a bad club gig.
No, I'm letting it soak in.
Yeah, I was too.
I'm letting it soak in. Yeah, no, I mean, I'm only 5 years younger than you, Andy. So yeah, it's been quite a journey over the years. But yeah,
I feel like over the years, also the stock in the underground of the Grateful Dead has risen. It's so interesting to read about bands that were punk or post-punk, and they listened to the Dead before they did this stuff, right? It was part of their culture. Do you get the comparison between the Velvet Underground and the Grateful Dead that comes up sometimes?
I don't know about a comparison. They were contemporaries, so it was two different scenes. It's like Lou Reed was New York and they were California, so it was like very different. And apparently, I think they were on the same bill one time, and there was a little friction over something. I don't even remember what it was, but I think bands in general are sort of competitive, which is unfortunate, but they are competitive, and I guess they looked at each other as the competition. But I love the Velvet Underground as well. It's kind of like it's to me it's just all music. Once you get into like what's trendy, then you're trying to be in with the in crowd, right?
Yeah, but they're stretching out.
That's true.
Yeah, but it's a different version of stretching out their music. They both had on their second album, long form, 14, 15-minute songs.
That's true. And Sister Ray is as dissonant as a lot of some of the Grateful Dead jam outs could be.
Right.
I mean, I think a lot of people don't realize that, during those jams in the second set, it could get very dissonant. And it's too much for me at times. It's like, okay, they're on an exploration. I want to get off here. There's a famous Dark Star from 11/11/73. I think we'll give you a taste for that. If you listen to that, you'll see like how far out they could go. And they're going as far out as the Velvet Underground could go when they would do their long extended jams.
I love this because this is an audio only podcast, but I'm watching Andy write down every single date that Mike says. So when I do a screenshot,
that's one of my top 10 shows.
Awesome.
Yes,
11/11/73.
Oh, I love
Probably
this.
on YouTube. Look it up.
Amazing. What were you going to say, Andy?
I love the way Mike says YouTube. Look it up on YouTube. You guys have like an East Coast accent. Do I sound like Mike? Come on.
Here's the thing. I never thought I had an East Coast accent. And I went down to New Orleans once, and we're at a hotel bar, and we asked the bartender, like, where are we from? Where do you think we're from? New York. It's like, I'm like, okay. All right. Like, you don't think you have an accent. You just go to another town, and people say you have an accent. How many shows do you think you went to, Andy?
Well, so this is where, okay. And also juxtapose this. The first live show I ever saw was Loggins and Messina.
Okay.
All right.
When they came to Harper College and they did their whole set as a medley. They played for 45 minutes. But he will home and she will be like me. So I would say that I'm going to lie and say I've been to 4 live concerts, and that means I've only been to 3.
Okay. But here's the thing. What years were you at Harper College? I mean,
75 to 78.
okay. 75. All right. Yeah, no. The Dead have a
I
famous
saw them at Harper. I think
Yeah,
I saw
they
them at
they
Harper,
probably
maybe.
played there, but they have a famous, I think it's from 1970. Pigpen was still alive, and yeah, you can look that up. That became a Dick's Picks. They have an acoustic set they did. It's really nice. Harper College. Yeah, I don't know the date.
Mike, when did you start being able to recall all this stuff? Like, did this happen years ago, or is this more recent, where you're just like, the who played what?
Yeah, this was during the period once you immerse yourself in the live shows that I was acquiring, and at a crazy rate, and I did listen to a lot of them, and the more you listen, the more you know what periods you like. I mentioned 72 to 74 as being my favorite era. Just because, yeah, that's the best songs, the best performances, one drummer. Another peak year is 77. And I listened to a show yesterday, May 3rd, 77. And when I hear with the 2 drummers, it's a little stiff. That's a good show. But those drummers have to sort of be locked in, for a lot of the time, right? You can't have the scattered drummer. So it's like a marching band a little, it's like it's a little locked in, and it's like a little stiff. So it doesn't swing as much as the one drummer. So, the great stuff in 77, but it's different. Yeah.
Well, the last 3 parts of the documentary are quite critical of the fan base at times, like, and how they decided to run things, and Jerry not wanting to he didn't want to police anyone. He didn't want to tell anyone what they could or couldn't do, and that had complications. And I didn't know about, I'm naive, but I didn't know about his heroin use and his deterioration and depression. And it seemed like a very unhappy existence in terms of he was one of the most recognizable people in the world, and he just felt like he couldn't go out in public. Like going to shows or getting these recordings later in his life before he died, were you getting a sense that things were changing?
Oh, no, I was not really on board. I wasn't on the bus, as they say, during those late years. I was doing other stuff. I didn't get into collecting the recordings until years later. Okay. So I wasn't, I wasn't aware of what was going on during the 90s. But reading about it, what comes out is, and they acknowledge this in the documentary, that it became a machine, and he was the head of the machine. And if he wanted to get out, all these other families that relied on the band for income would suffer. So he was sort of a trap. And you can understand he wants, these people are important to him, and but yeah, he couldn't get himself out of that situation, which is sad, and it killed him. It killed him,
Everyone felt sad.
Yeah.
Everybody was so sad about it when it happened. Dead fans were. It was just like,
it
wasn't a shock like Lennon was, but it was like you kept wanting him to. You kept hoping for. So it must have been common knowledge that he was really going downhill for years, probably, right, or a couple of years.
Yeah, they mentioned that there were attempts at interventions, and so on.
Right.
But he was fairly stubborn. He went into a coma, right? He overdosed.
He had diabetes, didn't he?
I
think.
Well, it was diabetes, but that was a drug overdose.
Oh,
yeah. Oh, yeah.
On heroin?
I believe so. Yeah, 86, I think, was when he had the overdose. So yeah, it was an ongoing problem that they were aware of, but they couldn't get through, which is what happens with addicts. As much as you try to help addicts, you can't get through all the time.
Right. And do you ever go revisit that period? Can you tell that the band is struggling, or were they still on their game? Or
no, it's sad. It's people will talk about a particular song he sang on the last show. The last show was in Chicago. I can't remember the date, in the 90s. And he sang a song, and it's like, it's a good performance because you can sort of just hear the ache in his voice. Andy mentioned earlier, here's the thing, he was doing sort of everything that was going downhill with the Dead, but he would do these solo projects with David Grisman. I don't know if you know those albums, Andy, but those
that's what. Yeah,
those albums are
bunch of them, yeah.
phenomenal. Those albums are phenomenal, like acoustic bass songs he did with David Grisman. They did about 3 or 4 of them. One is sort of they do like it's like a tribute to Miles Davis. Just really, that was a revelation when I discovered those records. I'm like, wait a second, the Dead were deteriorating, but he still had this in him. Even at this late period, he would find a project that would energize him, and he would give it his all. And those records are really, really good. I would say that's the last great stuff he did.
I gotta check that out because
Yeah.
I don't think I've heard of it.
Oh, that stuff is great.
Yeah, because he never stopped, did he? I mean, when the Grateful Dead broke up for a while, he just went into the Jerry Garcia band, and then he just work.
Yeah, he was a workaholic.
Don't Let That Deal Go Down from the Garcia band? Don't you? Or is that a Dead song? Don't you let that deal go down?
Well, I think that's an old-timey cover. No, you're talking about Deal. That's from Jerry Garcia's first solo record. Yeah, that's a great. That's a great song.
That's what a great song.
Yeah. That first Garcia record is really
great,
good. Yeah.
Amazing. John Kahn, the bassist, what was his name?
Well, yeah, he worked with them, but he worked with different musicians. Some of them. I mean, I think that first great solo record is mostly Bill Kreutzmann and some Dead people. Bob Weir's first solo record is pretty strong. And that's a Grateful Dead record. All the Grateful Dead are playing on that record. So yeah, the solo stuff can be decent. Bob Weir's first record, and Jerry had some good stuff along the way. He put out some really good solo records.
What about Dead and Company and the stuff that followed after Jerry's death?
I don't know anything about those, so I have to go to the mic on this. I have lost touch.
I'm officially off the bus, although somebody through the Best Show, affiliated with Madison Square Garden, had free tickets. So it's like hard to turn down free tickets, right? So out of curiosity, I went with a friend and went in with very low expectations. And this was with John Mayer was playing with them. And he's got some big shoes to fill, of course. And I went away pleasantly surprised. It was okay, Wasn't the Grateful Dead, but it was entertaining.
When did Hornsby play with him? Did they play with him?
Like in the 90s. And people talk about some of his shows. Branford Marsalis even would sit in with the Grateful Dead occasionally.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. 329.90. No, it's sick. It's a sickness, right? You're laughing at my sickness, but and I joke about it. When I first got into this club, let's say this website where we were trading all these shows, it amused me. I would laugh because they were just talking in code, and now I do it myself.
I do say the Grateful Dead movie, if anybody hasn't seen it, is a really good movie to show you the different parts that were going on, like the people under the stage, and that did kind of convey what it's like.
Is that late 70s?
Oh, yeah, that's when it came out. Yeah, I was actually in high school, and I wasn't even driving. I had there was there were a bunch of hippies in Belmar, New Jersey, who ran a movie theater, and they do midnight Rocky Horror Picture Show, midnight movies, concert movies in the summer, and they got the Grateful Dead movie. And they had it was a tiny theater, and they had these giant speakers, quadraphonic sound. And I had my mother drive us there. I was so excited to go see the Grateful Dead movie. It was fantastic. We got there about 2 hours early. I didn't even gauge the distance to this theater, So we got there so early. They let us hang out though. It was a cool little theater. But that's where I saw it, and I saw a lot of concert movies there, and Eraserhead.
Right. Well, yeah, that movie's interesting because you're close up, and I'm assuming that sometimes when you saw them, you were quite far back.
I never saw them close up.
No, I never.
I've never seen them close up.
Yeah, and they're not like, jumping around on stage and, running up,
No.
catwalks
No.
and doing stuff.
No, Pete Townsend.
Right.
Pete Townsend got this from Keith Richards. He said Keith Richards thought he was crazy when he asked him, "Can I take that?"
So how did they project? Was it just did you just have to like seep into what the music that was coming off stage, or could you feel the charisma of them coming off, even if they're just kind of still?
I think people were just locked into the music, everybody was just happy to be there. And I just remember just a good vibe. Yeah, I'm glad I wasn't around for the bad days of those wild crowds, 70, except for my one experience almost dying in a crowd.
Yeah.
It was relatively safe, and people were in a good mood.
Lots of nudity.
I never saw nudity.
In the film, they really lean into it. Even in the beginning, they said there's nudity and graphic nudity, and it's made for mature adults. So
one of their most famous shows, and there's clips of it in there.
Yeah.
And you see that naked dude,
yes,
right? The naked dude. They shot it. Andy, I don't know if you know this one. It's one of their most famous shows. 8/29/72. I think that's Sunshine Daydream. Sunshine Daydream is the name of the official release. And if you got that, you got the DVD of the video performance of that show. But most of the footage is spoiled because this naked dude is up on a pole right behind Jerry Garcia through the whole show. And I'm sure there must be a way to digitally remove him at this point. But I remember I got like a bootleg of that before the official release. And I'm watching this thing and I'm like, what didn't somebody have the sense to go say, "Hey, bud, can you get off the pole? You're spoiling this shot. We're trying to document this with somebody in a film crew couldn't throw a rock at the guy. I mean, get off the pole."
He has more screen time than Mickey Hart does in this film.
Oh, it's ridiculous. And I don't know. I guess you can probably Google it and find out who this guy is and what happened to him. But that's kind of a shame.
Yeah.
I think we know enough about him, maybe.
Yeah.
I don't want to see the true Hollywood story about him.
You sure it wasn't you, Andy? Just tripping out, going for your show?
You had the naked show.
Well, I definitely could. I mean, again, I don't know if you have done these psychedelic. You get what people are doing when they're spinning around. They're looking at something.
You saw the tendrils. The tendrils they talk about.
Yeah. I never saw quite those things, but someone talks about it. There's a guy named Steve Silberman. Is he in that? I'm confusing sometimes the Bob Weir thing, but he talks about how just you always felt like you want just the idea of getting that high and getting that high with the dead,
right?
Like in feeling that.
Yeah, it was a group
and that's
experience.
How it kind of was.
Yeah, it's a group experience. I was not willing to go that far.
But you also didn't. But you also sound like you weren't. You were square, man. You weren't
I
doing
guess
acid,
by deadhead standards, I was square. I'd like to, drink. I like to have a few drinks. But
don't ever do LSD. I'll tell you why. Because if pot makes you paranoid, which it can make you, you're not a good candidate for hallucinogenics.
Well, that's why I stopped doing pot, because pot I would have the good experience, the laughing till you can't stop.
Right.
And then I'd have the paranoid. So it was unpredictable. And I'm like, I don't like that unpredictable feeling.
And I don't like paranoia. Paranoia. I'm not a Navy SEAL, but I've had but I really feel like I had a couple of bad trips where I should get some kind of a medal.
Right. Did you ever have a bad trip at a Dead show?
No, I did have I never had a bad trip at a concert. The closest was I saw Hot Tuna in Harper College, and I loved Hot Tuna. Remember that acoustic album they came out with? But then they got into then they were playing really loud, and they had pedals, and they were on a delay, and it was really an awful concert.
If you were a Deadhead, there were surrounding bands that you were almost required to get into. Hot Tuna, the
New Riders.
the New Riders,
Mhm.
David Bromberg.
Yes.
You're talking about Hot Tuna. I saw them like in '78. They played Convention Hall in Asbury Park. I've never seen a band play until the venue emptied out.
Wow.
At a certain point, I think they just committed. Because they were actually going through a new wave period at the time. Hot Tuna.
Oh, wow.
So he would do an acoustic set, come back out with a 3-piece, do like a new wave set. Then he'd do another acoustic set. Then he'd do another new wave set. So this thing went on for like 4 hours. Me and my friends, you see, it was like we were up to the challenge. We're going to be the last ones here. So we just kept moving closer to the stage as the theater emptied out. It was hysterical.
Did the Dead ever dip their toe into new wave?
No.
Okay, because they did disco and some funk stuff. I just wondered, I never heard the Touch of Grey. Is that what the album's called, Touch of Grey, or is that the song?
Touch of Grey is like one of their classic. It could be a song from any part of their. That's how great it is to me.
Yeah.
It could be one of their. It fits in with their great songs, but
Right.
It wasn't like. By that time, it wasn't. That came out. When did that come out?
Touch of Grey
88?
was like 86, 87 in there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was on MTV all the
Yeah, it was
time.
an MTV sensation. That's what built it up.
It kind of remarkable when you think about it that it got through and found a younger audience.
Yeah, it just goes to show that, all those years of trying to be popular, when they're not even trying anymore, it's late in their career. Here it comes, a
Yeah.
top 10 hit.
And I would have hoped. See, I remember hoping, oh, Jerry will get better, and
Yeah.
just like I just, I think it's very much a fan
Yeah.
view all the time with them, especially, and I really worshipped. I was more of a worshiper back in those days. I really worshipped Jerry Garcia and Bob Dylan and all these,
Mhm.
and I really wanted their lives to be exact. I wanted them to be as great personally. It just was a ridiculous hope, but I didn't.
Yeah.
When I would think of Jerry,
Yeah.
I would just think positive. He's the greatest. Jerry's, and then Bob's great. It's like, and I think that's a good way. It's good. That's a good
Yeah.
way to be.
No, you want your heroes to be good people and not
Yeah.
have personal problems, but then you have to just sort of say, well, they are people and
Right.
everybody has problems. And
I've never had problems. Now, Mike and I have talked about this. The thing is, I've been this crazy business stand-up, and you'd think I would be bitter because most of the people I started with have gone way, way further than I am. But it's not that way at all. It's such a collegial feeling, and it's not about how much you did, right? How many people? If I can make one person laugh or something like that. I'm sorry about that riff.
No, it's great.
Halfway through that riff, I knew I was out. Mike could sense it. Both of you go, okay, it's over.
Well,
I couldn't
Andy,
stop. Just couldn't
it
stop.
was good. It was
Did
good.
the Dead have stage banter? Did they ever talk for?
Oh, I don't think they did. Right. That's why I know the things of like the Bob Weir saying that
Mhm.
trucking was number one. That's like the odd thing. Like
Okay.
I thought the Beatles, because I was addicted to the Beatles. So I hope we passed the audition. That was my idea
Right.
of stage banter. But it's an interesting thing because rock and roll people want to be comedians and they're often funny, but it's never. And this is a totally true story. I was in a band called TransFusion. It was a horrible name. We thought we were going beyond fusion, and we were playing a heavy metal bar, and they hated us. Totally true story. The club owner, and I'm trying to entertain the people, passes up a note, and the note says, "Cut the chatter." In other words,
Wow.
it never.
All right. Well,
Music, people seeing a concert don't really. The audience doesn't want you to talk.
Well, that's almost a backhanded compliment, though, right? He's saying he didn't insult the music. He's
Yeah.
just saying, I like the music, but the chatter. Now, there's some you can hear some Grateful Dead banner early on. Usually, sound problems. Phil Lesh was more sarcastic, so you get a fair amount of Phil being sarcastic, particularly when on that Cornell show I mentioned, the crowd apparently is just like crushing people at the lip of the stage. And at one point, they do this whole routine about when I say 3, everybody take a step back. When I say it, and they literally was trying to do crowd control from the
Wow.
stage. Yeah, yeah. But but in '72, Bob Weir, you'll like this, Andy. He briefly embarked on doing comedy between songs.
Are you
And
kidding me?
yeah,
Oh.
if just do a Google search. I'm just add it to your notes. The Yellow Dog story. And Bob,
And is it brutal? Is it
Yeah,
good
yeah,
or
no,
is it?
when you hear the joke, you've probably heard it before. It's about
Wow.
a guy who brings a dog into a bar, a yellow dog.
Oh, okay. And it goes. Oh, oh my God. And then how'd the crowd react to it? Well, I guess Dead Fans would have been fine with anything.
Well, usually some sound problem was being dealt with, so Bobby had to ad lib. And
he has that kind of a voice. How's everybody doing? He kind of has.
So
almost
yeah,
like
go check out some. I think he told the joke numerous times. He only had one joke though. That was it. The yellow dog story.
Wow. Well, somebody had to put a 90-minute thing together of all the yellow dog times he said it. There's got to be one person.
I think there's a banter thing. Just Google Grateful Dead banter. I think you can. Yeah, they're fanatical. I mean, they're nuts.
Wow.
You can find all this stuff.
Is there stuff that's still the Holy Grail that people didn't tape, or is it all just there?
I think it's all just there. So
Wow.
now they do official. They're still doing official releases. Dick's picks ended when he passed away, and now there's a guy, Dave. He's just up to 50. He's up to 50 Dave's picks.
Wow.
wow.
And you can get the official releases.
Most stories that are really funny to me are about me taking drugs and doing something weird. So like they're not Grateful Dead. I mean, one time I was taking LSD in Sylmar, which is a weird part of LA, and this guy Brian was talking about his fear of bees, and we're all very high. His fear of bees. I'm having trouble tuning my guitar. And I asked him, "What's out there, Brian? The bee? What's out there, Brian?" And everyone thought I was torturing him about his fear of bees. And I was talking about my string was out of tune. So that's the kind of hilarious. Those are my Grateful Dead stories, is me being high.
Musical misunderstandings.
I see a future tour, Andy. I see.
Oh.
Yes, I see you doing some Grateful Dead stories, some LSD talk.
Bromberg opened for Hot Tuna when I saw them.
Wow, there you go.
Yeah.
I think I've told this story too. I saw David Bromberg at a local community college, and Peter Allen opened up for him.
Peter? Oh, you mean
What
the
did he
singer
do?
guy,
I go to Rio.
Yeah.
Was he like dancing around and
Yeah,
stuff?
he had the palm trees on stage and everything. And I didn't know anything about him. I guess he was married to Liza Minnelli at the time, I think. This is like the late 70s.
Yeah.
And it was just a total mismatch. And of course, the Bromberg fans, you would think, would be a little more forgiving. But no, they just started booing him. I felt bad for him. But to Peter Allen's credit, he did not get booed off. He did his set. He was a trooper, man.
Wow.
He was a trooper. Even with his palm trees, they didn't knock his palm trees over or anything, but he took the most relentless booing I've ever seen at a show, to tell you the truth.
What's the most relentless booing you've ever seen, Andy?
Well, it was the time when I lost my place, and I.
Oh, this is personal now. Keep
No,
going.
no, no.
Keep going.
I can't go because all. If I heard booing, one thing I do want to say is like the thing about the Dead is like I wasn't scared of most of their fans and stuff like that, and even like I got into groups like I loved English Beat and I loved a lot of things. Sometimes the fans could get pretty rough, so I think that's kind of cool that they always pretty much had.
They were
People
mellow.
that you would not be scared of.
They were mellow
be
for
around.
the most part.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing. Well, I want to thank you both so much for coming on and illuminating me. And Andy, you'll have to send me your notes so I can dip in. And Mike, yeah, I might be, who knows? In a week, I might be asking you to burn me half your collection.
It's all on Google, man.
No, I want the CD. I want the little booklet things so I can flip through and write on them.
Yeah.
At the end of every episode, I ask the same question, but I tailor it depending on what we're talking about, the documentary here. So on a scale from 1 being the lowest and 36 being the highest, how many perfect volumes of Dick's Picks do you give this film on a scale from 1 to 36?
I'll go with 30, and I use algorithms. I don't know what Mike does, but I use algorithms. I'll go with 30. But the thing is, I can't separate the fact that I will watch anything about the dead at any time, and I'll probably enjoy everything.
I'm pretty much in that same category, and this is just a very well made documentary.
Yeah.
If you're a fan, you'll love it. If you're not a fan, I think you might appreciate it because it's kind of like a new world, right?
I loved it the second time through. I just was like, I kind of didn't know what my hang up, why it took me so long to get through it the first time. But it is exceptionally made. And I thought it was really frank. It wasn't, obviously there's things missing in it.
Yeah. They acknowledge some of the warts. Not all of the warts, some of the warts.
And it's surprisingly short. 4.5 hours for the Grateful Dead to get everything in. I was kind of shocked that they could. It's a tight film. It's not boring. It doesn't drag. It doesn't stick in anything too long. I
was actually disappointed because I thought every episode was an hour. And there's some short episodes. So it's not 6 hours. It's like you said, over 4 hours or whatever.
Yeah, and the credits are like 12 minutes long.
Oh, because the credits.
It's just
the credits are ridiculous.
You're like, wait, there's still 12 minutes to go, and then it's like, wow,
But I let those credits roll because there's music for most of them.
Right.
I think there was only 1 or 2 where they didn't have music going through the whole credit. So I'm listening to the music. I was enjoying the music.
I'm very touched that you both came on, especially for this topic. That means so much to you.
Wonderful.
So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Good to see you guys. This is great.
Mike, we'll keep in touch too, and we'll all keep in touch, right?
We'll do.
Okay.
Bye, guys. Thank you for listening to Revolutions Per Movie. We release new episodes every Thursday. We are a completely independently produced affair, so the best way to support us is to rate and review the show on your favorite podcast app and to subscribe to our Patreon over at patreon.com/revolutionspermovie, where you can get exclusive weekly bonus episodes every Sunday, as well as one-of-a-kind handmade Revolutions Per Movie goods that I send out to you. You can follow the show on social media at Revolutions Per Movie and find more information about our various guests in the episode show notes. Thanks again, and we'll see you next week. Bye!